think it was the Scottish poet Robert Burns who a couple hundred years ago said, "The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry." And more or less in terms of topics for this week's show, that's pretty much what happened. My initial plan was to focus on those new additions to Disney World in Florida, also to talk about the changing market for the Disney streamer and some of the other shifts inside the company. Basically, I've now spent a lot of time over at Communicore Hall, I've been through Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I've seen the new drone show, and I've talked with people about the progress on the Test Track redo and the Polynesian Tower, all of which are interesting projects. But then Disney made an announcement, which in terms of our show and our listeners is pretty big news, something that we simply can't push off until next week. So today we're going to jump into the big story, the one that likely will have the largest impact on your next visit to Disney World. And then next week we'll talk about all that is new at the resort. So what's that big story? Well, without a whole lot of fanfare, one piece of what should have been Bob Chapek's legacy was buried this past week, replaced by something that has been in the works for about a year. But the suddenness of this announcement caught most industry watchers by surprise. Also, the quickness of its implementation may leave some visitors with upcoming trips scrambling a little as they try to figure out how to manage this new wrinkle. So, we've got a lot to talk about today. We'll take a look at this issue from a number of perspectives. So, if you're ready, let's go. So, what's the big news? Well, after a little more than 2.5 years, the current version of Genie Plus is going away. Yes, the Genie Plus system will soon be done. Also, the name Genie Plus is retiring as well. The system and the name were both confusing, especially as there was the unpaid Genie option, the Genie Plus paid option, Lightning Lanes, and paid Lightning Lanes. Also, it was somewhat confusing as to when you could purchase Genie Plus, as the rules were very different in Florida compared to those in California. The rules were also different in certain ways as to how to manage the service, depending on if you were at the California resort or the Florida resort. This was clearly one problem: the amount of knowledge that you needed to have to use the system effectively, even in a basic way. For example, right here, we had a 45-minute podcast posted over on Bandcamp that explained how to best use the Genie Plus system with various strategies. That is, we had a 45-minute episode designed to teach people the most effective ways to use this system simply so they could reserve attractions on various dates for their vacation. So, the good news: most of this will soon be gone in Florida, and the name will also be gone in California, but more on that California situation in a moment. The announcement, though it technically includes Disneyland, is almost wholly focused on Walt Disney World. Genie Plus was never user-friendly, especially as it required guests to wake up at 7 in the morning while they were on vacation simply to maximize their ride reservation options. But here's another problem with Genie Plus. The strategies and the rules as to how to engage ride reservations at Disney World kept changing, sometimes month by month. So even if some of these forthcoming changes are positive, and some of them I think are, the overall effect of continuous changes to the ride reservation system will cause a level of confusion and frustration for the typical tourists. I'm at the parks fairly regularly. I imagine that many listeners to this podcast are there as well. But the casual guest who goes, let's say, once every 3 years, is being hit with very large swings in terms of how to manage and change ride reservations. Up until 2020 at Disney World, there was FastPass Plus, which allowed guests to reserve times for rides from home before their trip. If you stayed at a Disney World hotel, you could reserve attractions 60 days in advance. If you were staying off property, you could reserve 30 days in advance. But out in California, there was both FastPass and MaxPass operating at the same time. One was a free service, the other was a smartphone-based service with both doing similar things. If you came to Disney World during the pandemic, that is after 2020, there was no ride reservation system at all. You simply got in line and went on a ride. But if you came in late 2021, there was Genie Plus. And if you came back a little later that same year, there was a slightly different version of Genie Plus, and a few months later, a different version as well. And if you go to the resort later this year, there will be a new system that replaces Genie Plus that has its own set of rules and strategies. Add into this that on any given day, there's a group of once-in-a-lifetime guests at Disney World that have no idea that there's a ride reservation system at all. Now add in another set of recent changes to park hopping, park reservations, advanced dining reservations, and so on, all of which occurred during these same years. And so the startup level of knowledge here is simply too great, I would venture, for the casual tourist to fully digest and manage while they're on vacation, let alone digest and manage it for an experience that is advertised as being fun. Systems that are too complicated cause confusion, as do systems that change too frequently. And I think we've had a little of both for a long time at Disney World. So let's hope that this new system sticks. A good system plus consistency is the key to rebounding from a lot of Chapek-era problems, which in retrospect were caused by an extreme focus on profit combined with poor research on how guests actually use these parks. In other words, Chapek understood bookkeeping far more than he understood people, which came through in many of his decisions. I'm guessing by now that some of you have seen news about this change posted online, but there's a lot more nuance in this change than can be easily covered in a 2-minute news article or a quick social media post. We'll talk about the layers inside of this change, also how to best manage them. I've looked at the new system from a number of angles now. There are some benefits, also some limitations. Some people will like it, some won't. Also, I think it's fairly clear as to who will be in which camp. It's still a paid system like Genie Plus. I realize that nobody likes a paid system, especially when it replaces something that used to be free. But if you put aside the payment issue for a moment, and if you simply compare the paid Genie Plus system to the paid system that replaces it, I think there are clear winners and clear losers in all of this. I'll list out the group categories as to who likely falls where in all of these changes. Then I'll explain why I believe that this will be the likely outcome for each of these groups. As always, your individual mileage may vary, but overall I think that most people who are staying on property will generally like this system more than Genie Plus. Most people who don't like waking up at 6:55 a.m. while on vacation to book their first Lightning Lane selection will generally like this new system more than Genie Plus. And I say this as someone who just a few hours ago set his alarm for 6:55 a.m. simply so I could log into the MDE app while I was still in bed. And Disney perhaps is also one of the biggest winners here, as this new system is arranged to boost hotel occupancy by offering Disney hotel guests another set of on-property perks. However, there are some groups who will probably like this system less than Genie Plus. First, those staying off-property will probably like it less, as it puts them at the bottom of the list for early ride reservations. Second, locals and annual pass holders who live within driving distance of the park. Third, those who like the spontaneous option of waking up, checking the weather, and then deciding whether or not it is a day to visit the parks. That is, this system doesn't help the spur-of-the-moment visitor. And lastly, and this one is a big one, international guests probably won't like this system very much either. I'll discuss each of these groups in this segment and how each group does or does not connect well with the new system and its policies. Now for the big overview. Here's what you need to know. The last day for the current Genie Plus system is July 23rd, just a few weeks away. After that, the new system will be called Lightning Lane, which starts July 24th. For certain groups, as I mentioned, some of these changes will be positive and can make a trip easier to manage. But also, much of this system seems to be driven by Disney's need during slumping attendance in Florida to fill hotel rooms. Lightning Lane, in addition to fixing some long-time problems with Genie Plus, should help incentivize guests who are presently considering off-property hotel rooms to shift to an on-property hotel stay, as there is now a larger advantage to staying in a Disney room. In terms of Disney managing the resort hotel business, this is a good move that should increase profit, likely at the expense of those Holiday Inns, Ramadas, and Hiltons in Orlando or out in Kissimmee along Highway 192. And this is clearly part of the plan to help minimize losses when Epic Universe opens in 2025, without a slate of opening attractions, which Disney does not have. Disney will need to look to discounting and perks, such as early ride bookings, to fill hotel rooms once Epic Universe opens. One of the battles here now is over room reservations. Disney no doubt knows that some of its longtime regular visitors will come into town next year to see both Disney and Epic Universe. The battle now is, in whose hotel rooms are these guests visiting both Universal and Disney going to stay? Though some families will split their time between the Universal and Disney hotels, most travelers will simply pick one hotel, unpack all their stuff for their whole visit, and then drive or Uber to the other resort. And this is where this new line bypass system comes in. The new system will be called Walt Disney World Lightning Lane, because I'm guessing it would be really expensive to take down and replace all those existing Lightning Lane signs that were just recently installed in all the parks. The system will have two components. There will be Lightning Lane Multipass, which is a fee-based system where you can pick a number of attractions for one price. This is the replacement to Genie Plus. And then there will be Lightning Lane Single Pass, which is nearly identical to the current paid Lightning Lane system, except for the part where you can now book paid single pass reservations many days in advance. Now for the ins and outs of it. The old Fast Pass Plus system, with its 60 and 30-day booking windows, benefited those who deeply understood the Disney World ride reservation system. If you knew about the system and which attractions had the most demand, you could often find what you were looking for at 30 or 60 days out, leaving less knowledgeable visitors with a handful of Tomorrowland Speedway, Small World teacups, and parade viewing passes. The Genie Plus system tried to level out the playing field a little bit. It forced everyone, whether staying on property or not, whether they knew about the system or not before coming to Disney World, to make their first ride selection at 7 a.m. on each day that they visited a park. During this period, if there was one positive thing about Genie Plus, it was this: knowledgeable and less knowledgeable guests were all on even footing. The new Lightning Lane Multipass system, which debuts at the end of July 2024, is pitched as a middle ground option. There is an advance booking window, but it's far less than 60 days, which means that Disney will likely be able to communicate with each ticket holder as to how the system will work. This should help lessen the advantage of those who are very knowledgeable about how Disney World works with those visiting the resort for the first or second time. I'd say that this is the best way to look at this new system, that it is consciously arranged somewhere between the old Fast Pass Plus system, which ended in 2020, and the more recent Genie Plus offerings, which will end on July 23, 2024, hopefully in a way that addresses some of the underlying problems, except for the one about cost. Here's the details. Lightning Lane Multipass is the direct descendant of Genie Plus and Fast Pass, but there are some key changes. You can only buy Multipass for one park per day. Before you arrive, you can reserve up to 3 experiences in the same park. This right here is a plus. You now know what you're going to see before you arrive, and assuming the wording in the press is correct, you can also always keep up to 3 reservations, and here I'll quote the release. After using First Selection, check the My Disney Experience app for availability to make an additional selection. That means that all day long you can have 3 reservations. You no longer have to wait 120 minutes after your last reservation to make a new one if you don't have 3 reservations, and also you don't have to use up your first 3 reservations before you can book a 4th. You have a rotating stream of 3 reservations that you can keep all day long, so long as there's availability. Let me break this down a little more. Your first 3 selections, as I mentioned, need to be in the same park, just as it was back in the days of Fast Pass. But if you select that multi-pass option, your 4th reservation after you start your day in the parks can be in any park so long as there's space available and so long as you have a park hopper ticket. For Lightning Lane Single Pass, which includes Cosmic Rewind, Flight of Passage, Rise of the Resistance, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, and Tron, guests can book up to 2 selections per day, which mimics the rules for the current paid Lightning Lanes. That means under the single pass option, you can pay a set amount, let's say that's $12 or $20, to go on one of these 5 rides once. So for those wishing to max out their options, they can buy both a Lightning Lane multipass, which will give them the opportunity to reserve many rides in each park, and they can also hold 2 Lightning Lane single pass reservations per day. Anything beyond this in terms of ease of access would be a VIP tour, which in terms of cost is a substantial step up. If you're staying at a Disney hotel or select on-property hotels, which right now only includes the Swan and the Dolphin and Shades of Green, you can pick your Lightning Lane selections 7 days before your trip. If you're staying on property, you can book all of your Lightning Lane passes 7 days before your trip starts, up to 14 days worth of selections, so long as you're staying on property for 14 days. So, as an example, if your trip starts exactly 1 week from today, once the new system begins, you can book your Lightning Lane reservations for all 5 days of your visit today. That is 7 days before you arrive at the hotel. The window to purchase these Lightning Lane passes and to pick up these selections opens each day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Before this, you'll also need to have already purchased a Walt Disney World ticket with a date of use selected, or if you're an annual pass holder or have an undated ticket, have a valid park reservation for the day you wish to visit. If you're not staying on property, you can book your selections 3 days in advance of each park visit. And this is part of the system that's designed to incentivize more people to stay on property. There is one large catch here. International guests can only purchase and select Lightning Lane attractions once they are inside the U.S. The purchase and reservation presently takes place inside of the My Disney Experience app, and though I don't have the exact reasons for this exclusion, I can imagine a few. Initially, Disney suggested that this would apply to all non-US purchases, but then this past Friday, they updated that announcement, likely after some significant pushback, that Canadians would also be able to purchase and reserve Lightning Lane products from outside of the US. I'm guessing that this means that Disney will need to quickly assemble a web page that offers Lightning Lane products with both English and French descriptions to meet legal compliance there. But again, that's only a guess. There are other US-only purchase items inside the app presently, which includes meals that require prepayment, such as the Hoop-de-Doo. That can't be purchased in advance from overseas. Dining reservations where you don't pay in advance, you can book those from outside the US as payment is handled in the US after the meal is over at the table. But meals that require prepayment, that is, payment while you are outside of the US, can't be booked before you enter the US, and this has been true for a while. Probably many of you have also noticed that you can't book Disney hotel rooms inside the app. The app simply kicks you out to your region's Disney website, which is likely in full compliance with regional laws. Perhaps there wasn't time or resources to create a regionally compliant site for Lightning Lanes, or maybe it wasn't cost effective. A Lightning Lane multi-pass reservation is $20 or $30, whereas a night at the Contemporary might be $700 or $800. It's possible that for overseas guests, a VPN may be a way around this problem. We won't know until the system is in place, but more likely for overseas guests, using a US-based travel agent to book your trip and also to book your Lightning Lane purchases is probably a more reliable solution, also one that doesn't subvert the rules. Disney always pays the travel agent, not you. So if you're booking a package as an international visitor, you'll pay no more to ask a US-based travel agent to manage this for you. Again, the new Lightning Lane plan was announced quickly with little warning with a short lead time until implementation. So we won't really know what works until the system is in place, but my best advice for international visitors right now is to go with a US-based travel agent. The purchase clearly needs to be made in a US location. That is almost surely the sticking point. But perhaps not the management of individual ride reservations after the purchase has been made. Still, it's all a hassle, and I do understand that. But to shift back to the larger picture, in terms of how this new system changes the Florida tourism landscape, generally during peak seasons, the new Lightning Lane system gives a huge advantage to those staying on site, as during the winter holidays it's possible for most advanced reservations for Runaway Railway, Slinky Dog, Ratatouille, Frozen, etc. to fill up at the 7-day mark before those staying off property have a chance to book them at the 3-day mark, leaving them either in the standby line or hoping that someone on property cancels or changes their Lightning Lane reservations, leaving a spot open. There's a possibility that Disney could hold back some highly desirable Lightning Lane inventory and then release them during the day of use. This has likely happened with FastPass Plus as a way of partially satisfying guests who were unaware of the advanced planning required. It's also clear that for rides with a high level of downtime, Disney often holds some Lightning Lane passes until later in the day, when it's clear that the attraction either is or is not operating at capacity. But even so, on busy days, the majority of those early Lightning Lane reservation slots will be taken up by those staying on property 7 days out. It's also possible that on-property guests, during extremely busy days, might buy all of the Lightning Lane multi-pass options before others have a chance to do so. Simply, there are a limited number of Lightning Lanes that can be sold before the Lightning Lane becomes another version of the standby line, making the system near worthless. So, limited supply here, especially during peak visitation periods, is going to favor those staying on property. I don't think, however, that this is really going to be a significant issue, but I'll talk about that more in a moment. The paid Genie Plus and paid Lightning Lane systems are also changing customer spending habits at the resort. What I've seen anecdotally is that many guests prioritize rides over table service meals. That is, if there's a limited budget for a vacation, a number of families I've talked to have made the decision to limit the number of table service meals they enjoy while on vacation in order to shift that saved money over to Genie Plus or, in the near future, Lightning Lane MultiPass. Essentially, from what I've seen, many families are saying that it's more important to experience Tron or Rise of the Resistance or Flight of Passage, or not to be bothered with long lines, than it is to have dinner at Le Cellier or Park Fair or Ohana or Boma. So I'm not sure that Disney is increasing its overall revenue at the resort, but they are increasing profit. The food costs in terms of running, let's say Ohana, are placed against revenue, but there's no meaningful additional cost in creating a second faster line for an attraction that is already open and serving guests. The revenue on this second quicker line for an existing attraction is nearly all profit, minus advertising costs and the cost of one or two cast members positioned on the Lightning Lane. So again, in terms of that bottom line, this trade-off makes sense for Disney from a business perspective. Disney has also closed one of those old loopholes years ago during that FastPass Plus era. Some guests would make a hotel reservation, book their attractions at the 60-day out mark, and then cancel their room reservation, but keep those priority FastPass reservations if they were lucky. This new system now has been arranged specifically to avoid that. As was announced back in February, starting on January 1st next year, that's 2025, guests at Disney World now need to cancel 8 days in advance for a hotel room to receive a full refund, which means that they need to cancel 1 day before they are eligible to book Lightning Lane reservations under this new system. And let me add one more thing here. Both Disney World and Disneyland will start using the new name Lightning Lane Multipass on July 24th. But the changes that I've discussed, at least for now, are only being worked into the Disney World system. So Disneyland will have the same Genie Plus service. Generally, you can buy it after you've tapped into one of their parks, but Disney World will have this new system, which I think is largely there to quickly inflate hotel reservation numbers. Also, as was the same for Genie Plus, the cost of various Lightning Lane products will vary from day to day and likely from park to park, as their cost will be related to demand. Essentially, the busier a park is, the more value there will be in skipping the standby line, and therefore the higher cost of the various Lightning Lane products. When Disney announced the new Lightning Lane system, they released a few sample screenshots to illustrate how this product would work. In those screenshots, Lightning Lane Multipass for the Magic Kingdom was listed at $27. The Tron Single Pass Lightning Lane was listed at $20, and those prices are very much in line with current Genie Plus pricing. Also, one more factor here. For years, DOS or DAS or the Disability Access Service at Disney World has used Lightning Lanes for those eligible for disability access. Likely, the majority of people moving in recent months through Lightning Lanes were through the Disability Access System, not through the Genie Plus system. Recently, Disney placed new limitations and restrictions on their disability access service, and this is an entirely different topic which has some legitimate controversy to it in terms of who is included under the new rules and who is not. But by limiting and restricting who can use the disability access system, Disney has coincidentally freed up thousands of Lightning Lane reservation spots, and the expected increase in capacity for ride reservation spots can be seen in how the new Lightning Lane system is being initially conceived. To make sure there were enough options so that everyone on the old Genie Plus system could find an option to reserve every 2 hours, Disney increased the experiences on the service largely by adding reservations for character meet and greets, shows, and parades. Many of these items, though, won't be on the new Lightning Lane Multipass system when it debuts in July. It's possible that Disney might add them back in during peak visitation periods, such as the winter holidays, but their removal, at least initially, is a window into how many spaces Disney believes that they will likely recoup from the revised policies concerning disability access. So I doubt there will be a significant price increase to the new Lightning Lane service, as there is no increased demand for the system. In fact, the opposite may be likely true. There's likely a greater open supply of reservation spots now, which means that it should take longer for the new system to sell out on any given day. but to focus on the benefits here. They are these. The revised Lightning Lane system shifts some of the work of the vacation to before the vacation. No longer do you need to wake up at 6:55 a.m. to book your first Lightning Lane experience each day you go to a park. You can do that instead at 6:55 a.m. a few days before you come to Orlando. And if you're staying on property, you only need to wake up early just once to book all the initial Lightning Lanes for your entire trip. And if you want to modify your selections, after booking, you can change them in the MDE app if there's availability. I should point out that as far as I know, virtual queues will still be arranged at 7 a.m. on the day of your visit, but those only affect a small number of guests and typically not for each day you visit a park. In fact, presently there are only 2 parks for a total of 3 rides that are using the virtual queue option. On the MDE app, once it's available, the new Lightning Lane multipass process allows you to pick an attraction and a ride time. At most parks, the system divides the attractions into 2 categories. You can pick one from a list of high-demand experiences. Let's call these Tier 1 attractions. For the Magic Kingdom, this means you can pick one of the following: Big Thunder, Jungle Cruise, Peter Pan, Space Mountain, or Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And before moving on, let me just emphasize that Tiana's won't be a paid single pass Lightning Lane. It's part of the general multi-pass program. This might also suggest that Disney believes that Tiana won't be as large of a draw as, say, Cosmic Rewind or Tron, and that in itself is fairly revealing. Then, after you pick one of the attractions from that Tier 1 list, you can pick 2 from everything else, such as Haunted Mansion, Pirates, Tomorrowland Speedway, and so on. Let's call these the Tier 2 list. The same pattern is true for Epcot and Hollywood Studios, each of which has a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 list. The only exception is Animal Kingdom. Flight of Passage is still a paid single pass Lightning Lane, but all other experiences at that park are simply put into one long list, from Kilimanjaro Safaris to Expedition Everest, where you can simply pick 3 from a non-tiered list. Unlike the current Genie Plus system, you will be able to see the attractions and reservation times in your Lightning Lane Multipass package before you pay for that service. This should eliminate the need for Disney to refund the service, which happens more often than Disney would like, as people have to pay for the service before being able to book experiences. During peak times, some guests have paid for Genie Plus, but then they can no longer find the attractions or window times that were initially there, which at times leads to a refund. This new arrangement should solve that problem, as everyone can now see which 3 attractions they are purchasing, and anything beyond those 3 would just be gravy. In terms of pre-booking, and this is an important shift, all of the members in your booking party need to start with the same 3 reservations, but after booking and paying for them, you can modify individual members of your party into other experiences. Another thing to point out, you can't rebook the same attraction. There are no re-rides in this new Lightning Lane system, so you can't get 2 Lightning Lane passes for Space Mountain. But on the upside, after you enter the park, after you redeem your first Lightning Lane pass, the tiers go away. The tiers are only there for pre-booking. So after you go on your first Lightning Lane experience, you can book any attraction from either the Tier 1 or Tier 2 lists. You can pick up Tiana's Bayou Adventure or Space Mountain, or on the other hand, Dumbo or the Teacups, assuming there's available spots. From an optics standpoint here, Iger is in a unique position. Iger isn't proposing a shift from the free Fast Pass system to one that's paid. Chapek already did that, and that ill will associated with that shift was and likely still will be directed at Chapek. Now, Iger can retire Chapek's wonky system and replace it with a better arranged system with a pre-booking option. It's still a paid system, but the changes here, at least for visitors staying on property, should be mostly positive. Iger will still benefit from a paid system, but he won't necessarily be the one blamed for retiring the old free system, which likely will forever be tied to Chapek. Iger here is also under a lot of pressure to produce profits, especially as the streamer remains a financial drag on the company's bottom line. The Disney World hotel model is one where room capacity is designed to be near 90% most of the year. I'm aware of some Disney World hotels that are presently and regularly coming in around 80%. I'm also aware of some that during some recent periods have been at around 60% capacity. There's about 36,000 rooms at Disney World. It seems clear that this move with the new Lightning Lane products is there to incentivize guests to stay on property, which is one of Iger's current moves to reinvigorate the hotel business on property in Florida. And this is coupled at the same time with some heavy discounting on those same rooms. Hotel rooms later this year have just been offered to annual pass holders for up to 40% off, which is a substantial discount. I'd say that these two things together, the very quick, I would say hasty, announcement of the on-property perk with the new Lightning Lane products and the heavy discounting might suggest that, at least in the near future, hotel reservation levels are slightly worse than most presently suspect. And hotel reservations are the key that drives the whole resort, as on-property guests support restaurants, retail, and of course the parks. But again, that's a conclusion that I'm moved to from some anecdotal evidence and conversations combined with what those recent public announcements likely suggest. So let me close today by pointing out that the pivot away from Genie Plus is another move away from Chapek's vision for Disney and for the parks. For longtime Disney World fans, I think the new vision of the ride reservation system, even if it's paid, is going to feel a lot more like the old Fast Pass Plus system, which, except for the cost, is overall, in my opinion, a good thing. If there's any upside to the cost, especially for paid single pass Lightning Lanes, it's that this is now a way to create a definable revenue path for expensive new attractions. When projects are proposed now at WDI, they aren't only proposed against increased revenue for the entire resort as a whole, which can be substantial, but now proposals have a dedicated line of revenue that they can point to through paid Lightning Lanes that can be used to justify either very expensive projects or projects with lower ride capacity. And so long as this revenue is being used to create new attractions, that's not an entirely bad thing, at least from the way that I'm looking at it. Again, this new ride reservation system will go into effect on July 24th, and then we will start to see if it has a meaningful effect on on-property hotel reservations in Florida. I'll be back next week with a new episode, but you are now up to date on Disney's big surprise announcement of the week. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us on Bandcamp as monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave that link down in our show notes. So, Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.